If silence is supposed to bring peace, then why does it feel so heavy after 60? You wake up at 3 a.m. No noise, no pain, no reason. Just a stillness that sits in your chest like something's trying to speak. What if this isn't insomnia, but an invitation? Just one day, sometime after 60, you realize the silence that once comforted you now feels heavier than it should. Maybe it creeps in after the kids have moved out and the house stays quiet even on weekends. Maybe it arrives after retirement, when the routines that gave shape to your life are suddenly gone. Or maybe it slips in slowly, through the pauses in conversation, the mornings with no phone calls, the evenings when no one needs anything from you. It used to feel like freedom. You used to long for quiet, for a break. And now that it's here, stretched out long and uninterrupted, you lie in bed at 3 a.m. and wonder, why does it feel more like a weight than a rest? Your body isn't in pain. Not exactly, but there's a kind of tightness behind the ribs, a pressure in the air. You sit up slowly, not startled but pulled by something invisible. You look around your bedroom, nothing out of place, no sounds from outside. But the silence feels thick. It's not peaceful. It's full, too full. And you think almost without words, this isn't just quiet. This is something else. You've lived through decades of noise, of family, careers, alarms, bills, responsibilities. Your life has been full of voices, asking, needing, praising, correcting, depending. And now, without warning, it's not. It's just you. And in the stillness. But here's the truth most people don't talk about. Stillness isn't always soft. Stillness isn't always sweet. Sometimes silence feels like standing in front of a mirror you didn't ask for. It doesn't shout. It doesn't criticize, but it reflects. And if you've lived long enough, it reflects back everything you didn't want to feel. That's what starts to happen around 3 a.m. It's not just that the world is asleep. It's that the parts of you that were always put to the side now finally have room to rise. The Buddha taught that all things arise dependent on conditions. And when the conditions of your life change, when the noise fades, when the schedules stop, when the expectations fall silent, what arises next is often not joy, but everything that had to wait. The regret, the unspoken words, the grief that was paused, the ache that never had time to fully settle in. It all comes home, in the dark, in the stillness, when no one's watching. That's why silence feels heavier after 60. It's not that your life is empty. It's that your soul finally has space to exhale. And what comes out first isn't peace. It's pain, but not the pain of something new. It's the old kind. The kind you carried for so long, you forgot it was still inside you. A friend once told me, I used to think I was aging because my back hurt. Now I think I was just finally slowing down enough to feel what I never had time to feel. That's it. That's what the silence brings. Not new suffering, but ancient echoes that never got to speak. And when the world grows quiet, and the sun hasn't risen, and the birds haven't begun to sing, those echoes rise like smoke, soft but unmistakable. Some people try to fix it. Some people try to fix it. They buy white noise machines, They take melatonin. They binge television until their minds shut off. And sometimes that works for a while. But then one night, maybe tonight, you wake again. 7 a.m. Room dark. Body still. And you realize nothing's wrong. You're just awake. Awake in the way that isn't physical. Awake like something inside you finally stopped, pretending it could stay asleep forever. This, the Buddha might say, is a sacred moment. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's honest, because you're no longer running, because nothing is distracting you, because this is where the spiritual path actually begins, not on a meditation cushion, not in a temple, but right here, in the quiet, in the dark, in the truth you can't outrun anymore. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman named Diane, 66, widowed. 2 grown kids who called sometimes, visited less. She'd always been strong, held her family together, paid off the house, even organized her late husband's memorial without ever letting herself fall apart. She was proud of that. Everyone said how composed she was. But then the house got too quiet, and the nights got too long. She told me once, "It's not that I'm sad. It's that silence feels heavy, like it's pressing on my chest, like it's trying to tell me something." And I asked her, "What if it is?" She didn't answer right away, just stared out the window. And then, so softly, "I almost didn't hear it," she said. "I think it's trying to ask me if I'm ready to stop pretending." That night, she stopped trying to fall asleep. She sat up, lit a candle, put her hand on her heart, and she cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of cry that sounds like something finally let go. She didn't need advice. She didn't need therapy in that moment. She just needed to stay, to stop turning away, to stop labeling silence as empty and start seeing it as honest. That's what this video is for. Not to tell you that you're broken, not to give you hacks to fall back asleep, but to remind you you are not crazy for feeling this weight. You are not weak for feeling more than you used to. And you are certainly not alone. This is the Dharma of the later years, the Dharma of silence. And sometimes when the world falls quiet enough, what you meet is not loneliness, but the voice of your own life, finally asking, "Are you still here with me? Are you willing to sit? Not fix, not flee, but sit with what is. It's not easy, but it's sacred." And that's where we begin. Not with answers, but with stillness. A kind of stillness that feels like it could break you. But if you stay long enough, it just might be the stillness that puts you back together. There's a strange shift that happens somewhere after 60. You stop needing to raise your voice, but somehow the silence around you begins to speak louder than it ever did. It's not the kind of silence you hear in a library or during a walk in the woods. It's the kind that wraps around you at 3 a.m. The kind that isn't just absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, heavier, wiser, sometimes unsettling. When you were younger, silence felt optional, like a luxury, a weekend without plans, an hour alone at the coffee shop, moments you could steal back for yourself. From the noise, our silence doesn't knock gently. It arrives uninvited, stretches its legs across your living room, and sits with you in the early hours of morning, not asking permission, just being there. And what's worse, or maybe better, is that it doesn't just sit beside you. It sits within you. That's the thing most people don't tell you about aging. It's not just that your body gets quieter. It's that your inner world gets louder. The thoughts you brushed off at 30 now come back as full conversations. The feelings you buried at 40 return with names and faces. The questions you didn't have time for at 50 arrive in full color, sharp, personal, impossible to ignore. And the silence, it becomes the space where they all re-enter. In Buddhism, there's a word for this kind of inner space, citta. It means the heart-mind, the center of consciousness that holds both thought and emotion. As the body slows, the citta becomes more available, less distracted, less dulled by the rush of responsibilities. That's why older monastics often enter their deepest meditative clarity later in life. Not in spite of aging, but because of it. But for those of us who haven't spent our lives on a cushion in the forest, the sudden rise of inner noise can feel like a problem. It's not. It's a threshold, a doorway. Let me tell you about James. He was 72 when he joined one of our online Dharma gatherings. Vietnam veteran, former engineer, lived alone in a small town in Oregon. He said, "I'm not here because I'm spiritual. I'm here because I can't stand the quiet anymore." At first we thought he meant loneliness, but after a few weeks he opened up. "It's not that I'm alone. I've been alone for decades. It's that now when I sit still, I hear everything. I hear the arguments I never resolved. I hear the voice of my mother telling me I wasn't enough. I hear my first wife crying the night I left. It's like the quiet has a voice, and it doesn't shut up." We listened, and then one of the teachers said gently, "Maybe the silence isn't trying to haunt you. Maybe it's trying to finish the conversations you never got to have." He didn't say anything, just stared down for a long time, then nodded. That's when we knew the silence hadn't gotten louder. James had finally grown quiet enough to hear what had always been waiting. Aging doesn't make life more painful. It just makes it more honest. The filters we used to wear, busyness, distractions, performance, they thin out. And what's left is raw presence. And in that presence, the mind doesn't whisper the way it used to. It speaks plainly. Why did you choose that path? Do you still regret what happened with her? Are you proud of how you loved? Did you ever really forgive yourself? These aren't questions the young tend to ask, because when you're younger, there's still time to outrun them. But eventually, time stops being something you can waste. Eventually, you notice the clock differently. You don't panic, but you become precise, intentional. And in that intention, silence sharpens. It becomes less about peace and more about truth. This is the moment many people mistake for depression or for something wrong, but in Buddhist psychology is known as a turning, a moment when the mind turns inward, not because it's collapsing, but because it's finally ripening into reflection, ripening into wisdom, ripening into the kind of depth that can only be reached by walking the long path of life and surviving. And that's what I want to say to you now, gently, because I know how painful it can be. If the silence feels loud, If the stillness of your nights is filled with echoes, that's not a sign of failure. That's a sign of readiness. You are not falling apart. You are finally, after all these years, returning to the inner voice you had to silence to keep going, returning to the questions that were too big for earlier years, returning to yourself. There is a Zen saying, when the mind grows still, the soul begins to speak, but it speaks in a language the noisy world cannot understand. And so here you are, wrapped in blankets, heart heavier than usual, body not quite at ease, but something else, aware. And it's not asking you to fix it. It's asking you to listen, to feel the rhythm of your breath, to feel the ache in your rib cage, not as a flaw, but as a messenger. To realize this silence isn't just silence. It's life calling you back to your deepest self, to the part of you that never needed to earn love, never needed to be strong, never needed to outrun the past, just needed to be seen. That's why it gets louder now, because you finally can. Because the noise has cleared. Because your soul has been waiting for decades for this precise window, not to judge you, but to invite you in. So tonight, or whenever the silence wraps around you a little too tightly, pause, place your hand on your chest, feel the beating there. That's not a problem. That's a poem. A soft, steady reminder you are alive. You are alive. You are feeling. And in part 3, we'll go deeper into what this silence is actually made of, and why it's not emptiness, but unspoken memory, unreleased love, and unheard wisdom. And how, with Buddhist awareness, you can begin to turn that weight into warmth. There's a moment, quiet and slow, when you realize that what's been waking you up at night isn't your bladder, your back, or your age. It's not the creaking floor, or the neighbor's porch light, or a glass of wine too close to bedtime. What's waking you is weight, not physical weight, emotional weight, spiritual weight, the kind that settles deep into the chest, not like an illness, but like a truth that's been waiting patiently. You lie there staring into the dark, wondering why your mind feels busy even when your thoughts are quiet, why your body feels restless even though you haven't moved in hours, why your soul feels full, but not in a peaceful way, like a closet packed with things you forgot you were storing, like a suitcase you've been dragging for years but never opened. And then it hits you, slowly, clearly, achingly. You're not waking up because you're restless. You're waking up because you're carrying too much. And the silence of 3AM, it doesn't distract you from it. It reveals it. The Buddha had a word for this, dukkha, often translated as suffering. But that's not the full truth. Dukkha is more subtle than pain. It's the friction of living in a way that no longer fits. It's the tension between the life you've lived and the truth you've never made space to feel. It's the weariness of having held everything together for everyone else and realizing no one ever told you where to put your own grief when the crowd went quiet. That's the kind of weariness that shows up at 3AM. Not as chaos, but as tightness in the chest, as an ache behind the eyes, as a quiet voice whispering, "You forgot something, something inside yourself." You think back. You remember the years you didn't cry because you had to be the strong one. But the times you said "I'm fine" when you weren't. The dreams you put away because they didn't fit the role you were playing. The apology you never gave. The goodbye you never really spoke. The version of you that stayed silent so someone else could feel safe. And suddenly the silence around you feels personal, not empty. Just filled with the pieces of your life you weren't ready to carry until now. This is what happens as we age, not because we're broken, not because we're weak, but because, finally, there's room. Room in our hearts, room in our time, room in our attention to feel what used to be too loud, too overwhelming, too inconvenient to name. A man once told me, "I didn't realize how much I missed myself until my wife passed away." The silence of those nights didn't just bring grief. It brought me. I met parts of me I hadn't seen since I was 25, and they weren't angry. They were just waiting. That's what silence does. It waits, and when you're ready, it opens the door. Not to scare you, but to invite you back to the places inside you that still need love, still need listening, still need breath. In Buddhism, we speak of kleshas, inner afflictions, emotional knots that create suffering. They're not sins. They're not defects. They're simply moments we couldn't digest. Moments of fear, shame, heartbreak, confusion, frozen in the mind stream. And over time, they accumulate. They settle deep in the psyche like silt in a riverbed. And we carry them, not because we want to, but because we didn't know we had another option. Until one night, one still, sacred night, we wake up at 3 and the house is quiet. The air is still. There are no more voices calling your name. No children asking for snacks. No emails waiting. Just you and your breath. And the feeling that something inside wants to be seen. Not fixed. Not solved. Just witnessed. And maybe for the first time in your life you feel brave enough not to fight it, but to sit with it. Let me tell you about Elaine. She was 69, lived in a condo in Arizona, recently divorced after a long, quiet marriage. She came to one of our Buddhist grief circles and said this: "I'm not crying because I miss him. I'm crying because I stayed silent for 35 years. And now that it's quiet, I can finally hear what I was too afraid to say." We asked her what that was. She closed her eyes, took a breath and whispered, "I wanted more. I always did. And now the silence is asking if I still do." That silence, it wasn't punishing her. It was holding her. It was waiting for her to come back to herself. And this is what 3AM is for. It's not about sleep. It's not about insomnia. It's about memory. An invitation. It's the hour the universe uses when everything else has failed to get your attention. It doesn't shout. It doesn't crash through your life. It simply places a hand on your shoulder and says, "Do you remember who you are? Not what you've done. Not what you've survived, but who you were before the roles, before the masks, before the ache." And it doesn't ask for answers. It just asks for presence. You don't need to chant mantras. You don't need to sit cross-legged in lotus pose. You don't need to be a monk. You just need to be honest. To place your hand on your chest. To breathe. To say, maybe for the first time in a long time, I'm here. I see you. And I'm sorry it took so long. This is how the healing begins. Not with grand gestures, not with spiritual lightning bolts, but with presence, with honesty, with allowing the silence to teach you what the noise never could. You were never just tired. You were holding too much. And now, finally, you're allowed to set some of it down. Not all at once, not forever, but tonight, in this moment, in this breath. Let it go, just a little. You've carried it far enough. It's tempting to think that awakening comes with a flash. That if something important were trying to speak to you, it would shout. But here's the hard and beautiful truth. The soul doesn't yell. It waits, not because it's timid, but because it knows. The mind, in its frantic spinning, isn't a good listener. The soul speaks softly because it honors timing. It honors readiness. It honors readiness. It honors the long, slow journey back to stillness. And so it waits for the children to grow, for the career to end, for the house to quiet down, for the calendars to stop being so loud. It waits until the mask slips, until the titles fade, until the illusion of control wears out its welcome. And then, often in the still hush of a 3 AM room, it speaks, not in words, but in presence, in memory, in a feeling you can't name, but can't ignore either. That's the soul. And when you're over 60, 65, 70, you begin to notice it more, not because it wasn't there before, but because the world finally gets quiet enough for you to hear it. That's the paradox of aging. The outer noise goes down, but the inner depth goes up, and in that depth you meet things you forgot. A younger version of you that never got to feel safe. A dream you put down because life asked you to be practical. A truth you swallowed because someone else's comfort mattered more than your honesty. They return, not to hurt you, not to reopen wounds, but to complete a conversation that your life had to postpone. That's the real power of Buddhist stillness. It doesn't demand that you fix yourself. It just invites you to stop hiding. Because the soul, that wise, quiet knowing inside you, doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be present. Let me tell you a story about Michael. Michael was 73. He'd been a firefighter for over 3 decades, saved lives, buried friends, raised 2 sons after his wife died young. When I met him at a meditation retreat, he didn't say much. But one night, after a long sit under the stars, he walked up and said, "I always thought meditation was about becoming calm. But tonight, I realized it's not. It's about finally hearing the things I buried so deep, I forgot they were even mine." I asked him what came up. He paused, looked at the firelight flickering in the center of our circle, and said, "I remembered the face of a boy I couldn't save, and the words I didn't say to my wife before she passed, and how long I've carried all of it without ever telling anyone." And then his voice cracked. "But I didn't come here for peace. I came here because I knew, in my bones, that silence was going to teach me something no one else could." That's the soul's voice. That's what it sounds like. Not poetic, not polished, just real. And here's the Buddhist teaching behind it. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "As a rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not shaken by praise or blame." But that kind of unshakable presence doesn't come from hearing more praise. It comes from sitting through the silence and hearing the voice beneath all the noise, the voice of the soul, the one that doesn't need applause, doesn't need validation, doesn't need to win or prove or defend. It just needs to be heard by you. And the silence of night, especially around 3 a.m., that's when you're finally free of performance, free of roles, free of the busyness that kept you from yourself. That's when the soul leans forward and says, "I'm still here, and I've been waiting," not impatiently, not resentfully, just faithfully, lovingly, because the soul knows you were doing the best you could. You were surviving. You were tending to others. You were holding up the world in ways no one may ever fully thank you for. But now the world is quiet, and the invitation isn't to give more. It's to listen deeper. That's why the silence feels so different now, because the noise of life once protected you from this moment. And now, finally, you're strong enough to face it. This moment of stillness isn't empty. It's full of everything that matters, everything real, everything you've been carrying without even knowing it. And Buddhist practice isn't about running from that. It's about returning to it, with breath, with presence, with a hand on your own chest saying, "I'm not going anywhere. I hear you now." That is the beginning of real freedom. Not fixing, but feeling. Not solving, but staying. Not chasing peace, but finally becoming it. And that's what the soul has been waiting for. In part 5, we'll explore what to do when silence brings sadness, and how that very sadness might not be a sign of brokenness, but the very first sign of release. Sometimes it doesn't come as a memory or a clear insight. Sometimes it just shows up as a heaviness, a gray fog sitting quietly in your chest, not loud enough to panic, but deep enough to make you question everything. You lie awake at 3:11 a.m. The moon outside feels like it's watching you. The walls feel thinner somehow, and the silence, though soft, feels like a hand on your shoulder, not comforting, but insistent. You wonder if this is sadness. And in a way, it is. But not the kind you're used to. Not heartbreak or grief in its obvious form. Not the loss of someone. But the quiet ache of all the parts of you you never let fall apart. Sadness at this age doesn't come with sobs. It arrives in silence. It shows up as a slow breath that gets caught before the exhale, as the feeling that something inside you wants to melt but isn't sure it has permission yet. And here's the truth Buddhism gently offers, one many of us avoid. Sadness is not a mistake. It's a movement of energy, of karma, of long-held stories finally starting to loosen. In the West, we're taught to treat sadness as something to escape. Take a walk, call a friend, turn on the TV, scroll until you forget what you were feeling. But in Buddhist psychology, sadness is sacred because it signals softness. It means the walls are thinning, the armor is cracking, and the soul is breathing again. You see, when the mind finally stops trying to be strong, when the body is still and the roles are quiet, the heart finally speaks. And often what it says first is a soft, steady cry, a cry not for help, but for recognition. A man named David once described it like this: I was sitting in my kitchen, 3:22 in the morning. The clock ticking felt louder than usual, and out of nowhere, I started crying. Not like I lost someone, more like I found someone, a younger me, sitting in the corner, waiting to be picked up, and I finally did. That kind of sadness, it's not depression, it's delivery. It's your body delivering old grief to the surface, so it can finally be seen, so it can finally be let go. Think of it like this: your nervous system, your emotional body, your spiritual self. I've been collecting things for decades, moments you couldn't feel, emotions you didn't have time for, tears you held back because someone else was watching. And now the room is empty, the world is quiet, and those emotions knock, not because they want to hurt you, but because they want to be released. And release doesn't always come in fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the simple stillness of 3 a.m. In the moment when you sit up in bed, breathe deep and let your eyes water without knowing exactly why. That's healing. That's movement. That's Buddhist practice. In real life, you don't need robes. You don't need Sanskrit. You don't need to know all the sutras. You just need to stay. Stay with the feeling that you want to label wrong. Stay with the ache that rises for no reason. Stay with the sadness that feels out of place, but isn't, because here's what's really happening. The soul, which never left, is giving you space to finally soften. And sadness, that's not weakness. That's the beginning of release. The lotus flower, that sacred symbol in Buddhism, doesn't grow from sunshine and comfort. It grows from mud. It rises from beneath the muck. Slowly, without resistance, with grace. Your sadness is not the mud holding you down. It's the ground you're rising through. Let me tell you about Linda. She was 67, her children grown. Her husband passed 5 years earlier. One night, she sat on her back porch wrapped in a blanket holding tea that had long gone cold. And she told me something I never forgot. I thought I was falling apart, but now I see I'm just finally letting go of all the parts I held too tightly. She wasn't unraveling, she was unbinding. That's what sadness is. It's the loosening of the grip. It's the untying of the knot. It's the moment your inner self stops pretending and just says, I want to rest now. And in Buddhist language, that's not a failure. That's a blessing. Because only when the hands are empty can they hold peace. So if you're crying quietly tonight, if you feel something stirring in the stillness, don't turn away. Place your hands over your heart. Breathe in slowly and say, I allowed this. I honor this. I trust this. You don't need to understand it. You just need to trust that nothing is showing up by accident. Not even sadness. Especially not sadness. Because in Buddhism, we don't fear sadness. We bow to it. We say, thank you for coming. I'm ready now. There's a point in the quiet, maybe after the tears have stopped, but before you fall back asleep, where the room feels different. Not lighter exactly, but fuller. not because someone has entered, but because something has. A kind of presence. A weight that doesn't crush but holds. And you begin to feel, without words, what Buddhist teachers have pointed to for centuries. This night, this exact moment, isn't empty. It's holding you entirely. We're conditioned to think of nighttime stillness as absence. No voices, no movement, no sun, no sound, but silence isn't absence. Silence, when you really enter it, is a presence all its own. And sometimes it knows more about you than your daytime mind ever did. At 3 a.m., you are no one's employee. You are no one's parent, no one's provider, decision maker, or performer. There are no meetings, no notifications, no demand. Just the air, the walls, the weight of your own body beneath the blankets, and the feeling, subtle but undeniable, that something in the dark is listening. Or maybe finally you are. It's not God in the traditional sense, not a being watching from the clouds, but something quieter, closer, like a truth that lives inside your breath. And if you really stop, if you stop trying to sleep, stop trying to escape, stop trying to fix, and just feel, you'll sense it. The night itself is a kind of cradle, and it's been waiting for you. Buddhist teachings often refer to this as suchness, the state of being completely, fully, simply what is. No agenda, no pretense, just pure presence. And at 3 a.m., when the world stops performing, you get to meet it, not outside yourself, but as yourself. A woman I once guided in meditation said it like this: I used to dread the night, but now I think the night is the only time the world stops asking me to be anything. It's when I finally get to just be, without expectation, without trying to make sense of everything. That's what we mean when we say this night is holding you. It's not just a quiet hour. It's a mirror, a space where nothing is required of you, except your honesty. And sometimes that's the scariest part, because without the noise of the day, the only thing left to face is yourself. But here's the beautiful part, dear one. What you find in the quiet isn't a failure, it's a survivor. The person you become didn't arrive without cost. You've endured, you've carried, you've adapted. And now that there's space, you can start letting some of it down. Because what holds you in this moment isn't judgment, it's compassion. This silence doesn't come to evaluate you. It comes to make room for you. It doesn't ask why you're not over it yet. It simply whispers, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. In Buddhist terms, this is known as karu, compassion, not just for others, but for yourself, especially in the moments when you're most tender, most tired, most uncertain of who you are without all the doing. Karu doesn't mean pity, it means the willingness to stay with suffering, gently, steadily, until it can begin to unwind. And that's what this night does. It stays, even when no one else is awake, even when you feel too old, too far gone, too full of regret. Just like your breath, just like your soul. Let me tell you about Thomas. He was 70, living alone after a long life of service. He'd been a nurse, a volunteer, a father, a husband. He told me something that cracked my heart open. I thought I was lonely, but I realized it wasn't people I missed. It was myself. I missed me. And at 3 in the morning, I finally met him again. I asked what he did when he woke up. He smiled and said, "Nothing." I just put my hand on my chest and said, "There you are. I've missed you." That's the kind of presence this night offers. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's not the kind of healing you can post on social media. But it's the kind that shifts something deep in your bones. Because for once, nothing is asked of you. No performance, no productivity, no plan. Just you, lying still, breathing, returning. And this, according to the Buddha, is the beginning of awakening. Not a sudden enlightenment with halos and visions, but a soft, steady returning to what was always true. You are already enough. You don't have to earn peace. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to keep chasing the life you think you should be living. Right now, in this silence, you are home. The night is not empty. It's full of you. And maybe that's what you've been avoiding all along. Not the silence, but the self within it. The one that aches. The one that feels too much. The one that wants to be forgiven. So let the silence hold you tonight. Not as punishment, but as practice. The practice of being with what is. Without judgment. Without running. Without fixing. Just presence. That's enough. You don't notice it at first. Change never announces itself with trumpets. It happens quietly, the way fog rolls in over a sleeping lake. Soft, steady, unstoppable. At 3 a.m., when you're finally still enough to notice the breath without chasing it, when your mind isn't trying to solve anything, when you no longer call this hour a problem, but a place, that's when the transformation begins. Not the kind you're used to. Not the motivational checklist kind. Not the new year, new me kind. This is the kind of change that doesn't happen to you. It happens within you, and it's built slowly in silence. Buddhist teachers have always known this, that the deepest shifts don't come from force. They come from staying. From allowing the truth of your life to rise, not so you can fix it, but so you can befriend it. Because healing is not the same as erasing, and silence is not the same as emptiness. And this hour, this dark, tender hour, it's not a place you pass through, it's a teacher. And when you let yourself stay, when you stop turning the night into the enemy, you begin to see what this teacher is offering. A new rhythm, one breath at a time, one release at a time. One release at a time, one memory held without judgment at a time. And little by little, what once felt like sadness becomes spaciousness. What once felt like loneliness becomes light. What once felt like restlessness becomes presence. This is what Buddhist aging is really about. Not becoming irrelevant, not disappearing, but becoming vast. Becoming the kind of presence that can hold grief and gratitude in the same breath. The kind of awareness that no longer needs answers, because it trusts the questions. A woman named Elise once told me this. I thought my spiritual awakening would feel like fire, but it didn't. It felt like laying down in the grass at 3 a.m. and realizing I don't have to be anyone else anymore. That's it. That's the moment. The moment when you stop fighting who you've been. Stop chasing what could have been. Stop resisting the stillness you thought would break you. And instead, you breathe into it. You say, I'm here. I don't know what's next, but I'm not afraid to listen anymore. That's the doorway, not to perfection, but to freedom. Because when you stop resisting the silence, you stop resisting yourself. And when that happens, everything inside you begins to exhale, the muscle memory of decades spent holding it together starts to unwind. The emotional knots begin to loosen, not because you force them, but because you stop pulling. The quiet begins to fill with warmth, not because the world changed, but because you did. That's what happens when you let the night teach you. When you let the stillness reshape you. When you stop filling every gap in your life with distraction and start filling it with attention. The Buddha taught that liberation isn't found by clinging to joy or avoiding sorrow. It's found by resting in what is. That's what 3AM is training you for. Not control, not answers, but presence. And presence is what changes everything. You begin to walk through the world slower. Not because you're old, but because you're old, but because you're wise. You speak less, not because you're tired, but because you're listening. You need less, not because you're fading, but because you've remembered what matters. You begin to see the day not as something to conquer, but as something to receive. And when pain comes, you don't flinch, because you've already met it in the dark. You've already sat with it. You know its name. And more importantly, it knows yours. This is the quiet miracle of Buddhist practice. It doesn't save you from your life. It brings you fully into it, with eyes open, with heart soft, with breath steady, and no one will see it from the outside. They'll think you're just aging, just slowing down, just one more person who's up at 3 a.m. for no reason. But you'll know better. You'll know the truth. You're not falling apart. You're falling into place. You're not restless. You're finally available. You're not broken. You're becoming real. So tonight, when the silence comes again, don't ask it to go away. Ask it to stay. Invite it in. Light a candle. Breathe deep. Place your hand over your heart, the same one that's carried decades of stories, and whisper, I'm here. You can stay. I'm listening now, because this night, it's not your enemy. It's your reflection, and it's full of you. You didn't plan for this moment. No one does. There's no date circled on a calendar that says, this is the night your life will quietly shift. But somehow, you find yourself here, in a room that hasn't changed, in a body that has, at an hour the world still calls inconvenient, but that your soul now knows is holy. 3-0. The moment you once cursed now feels like a doorway. The silence no longer feels like punishment. It feels like permission. Permission to rest, not just your body, but the story you've carried too long. Permission to stop fixing, doing, chasing. Permission to return to something deeper, to someone you forgot how to be. You, the real you. Not the role, not the mask, not the strong one, the busy one, the reliable one, but the aware one, The one who's been here all along, watching patiently, waiting for you to be still enough to notice. In Buddhism, we call this returning to the breath, but it's more than air moving in and out. It's a metaphor for coming home. Each inhale, a gentle reminder, I'm still alive. Each exhale, a soft letting go. I don't have to carry all of this anymore. This is the most radical truth the Buddha offered. That your awakening doesn't begin with achievement. It begins with presence. And presence is born in silence. Because only in silence do we hear what the world drowns out. Only in silence do we feel what distraction numbs. Only in silence can we begin to see clearly. And when you see clearly, you realize there was never anything missing. Only something waiting for you to stop, waiting for you to rest, waiting for you to say, I'm ready to come home. I remember a man named Alan. He was 78. A retired teacher, lived alone in a house filled with books and old photographs. He told me, I used to hate waking up at night. It felt like my body was betraying me. But now I think it was the most loyal part of me, trying to bring me back. Back from what? I asked. He paused, smiled faintly. Back from everything that wasn't really mine. The expectations, the guilt, the noise, the pretending. He said now when he wakes at 3 a.m., he lights a single candle. He sits in silence. He breathes. And he whispers, I'm here. Welcome back. No technique, no formal mantra, just presence. That is Dharma. That is healing. That is enough. And you can do the same. Tonight. Any night. If the silence wakes you, don't fight it. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it become a companion, not a shadow. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the warmth. Feel the rhythm that's carried you through every storm. Feel the story beneath the surface, the one your younger self didn't have time to tell. And then say quietly, I see you. I am here now. You're safe with me. That, dear one, is how you make peace. Not by forcing the light, but by staying in the dark. Long enough for your eyes to adjust, for your breath to soften, for your heart to begin remembering what it feels like to trust. That's what the Buddha meant when he spoke of liberation. Not floating above the world, not escaping sorrow, but walking through it with eyes open, with breath steady, with compassion for the one who walks. You've come so far. And even if it took decades to reach this stillness, even if the silence felt heavy at first, look where you are now. Awake, not wide-eyed, not restless, just present. That's enough. Let it be enough. Let this silence, this space between doing and becoming, become your practice. And over time, your path. A path that doesn't lead away from who you are, but deeper into it. A path not paved with plans, but with presence. A path that doesn't begin with someone else's voice, but your own breath. And maybe, just maybe, this is the path you've been on all along. It just took the quiet to finally see it. So tonight, if you wake again, Don't ask what's wrong. Ask what's ready, and then listen. Not for an answer, but for a presence. The silence isn't here to test you. It's here to receive you. Let it hold you. Let it shape you. Let it soften you. Let it bring you home. Because after all these years, after all the giving, the surviving, the striving, you don't need to become someone else. You just need to remember who you are when the world is finally quiet enough to let you hear it. This is the invitation, not to fix, not to rush, not to resist, but to rest. And in that rest to return fully to the truth that never left you. You are whole. You are whole. You are home. Welcome back. You've come all this way. From the weight of silence to its wisdom. From the ache of 3M to its invitation. From the stories that once haunted you to the breath that now holds you. And if you're still listening, still here, know this. You are not alone in this quiet. You are part of a sacred thread. A lineage of souls who wake in the dark, not to escape life, but to meet it more fully. Let the world keep sleeping. Let the noise rest. Tonight, you remembered something most people forget their whole lives. That peace doesn't always arrive wrapped in sunlight. Sometimes it comes in shadows. Sometimes it knocks softly at 3 a.m., carrying nothing but a whisper in a mirror. And when it does, you don't need to be ready. You only need to be willing to sit, to breathe, to listen, to allow the silence to show you not what's missing, but what was always waiting. Your presence is a prayer. Your breath is a vow. And your story, yes, even the quiet parts, is sacred. So before you close your eyes again tonight, let this be your blessing. May your silence be soft. May your heart feel held. May your past know peace. And may the next time you wake in the dark, you remember you are already home.